Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin Daf Samachvav. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran Zoom family in honor of our fellow learner, Tina Lam, on the marriage of her daughter, Devorah, to Daniel. We are so happy to be able to celebrate virtually with you in the schut of this wonderful marriage. Hashem should bring chesed to us just as kachesed hanitan al panei chatan. Today's daf is also sponsored by Hadar Heft in loving memory of Michal Ruth bat Itamar Yitzchak and Ada Etel and Tova bat Aryeh Yitzchak and Sarah. We are now going to get started with where we finished yesterday. We dealt yesterday with the fact that Kiddushin is different from monetary law. That in monetary law, the point of witnesses is really just to verify that nobody's lying. So therefore, if you have honest people and you're not worried about lying, or for whatever reason you did it without witnesses, it doesn't matter, it's still effective. The issue comes in with Kiddushin. Kiddushin, and as we talked about get, is different because without witnesses, there is no marriage. And then we talked about the fact that basically, if a husband says to a wife, that basically is ineffective if there's no witnesses testifying. And then we said, even if there's one witness and both agree, right? We had a big machloket about this. Is one witness enough? Only Rav Papa said that you have to be concerned that perhaps it's Kiddushin. He didn't say it's definitely Kiddushin. But according to most of the other rabbis, Rav, Shmuel, we saw, and Rav Kahana, they all said that that is not Kiddushin. If there's one witness, that's not enough, okay? Only if there were witnesses and we can't find the witnesses, then we can claim that, if we have other reason to believe, like both say, listen, we were betrothed, there were witnesses, that's a different story. But if there weren't witnesses at all, and we know there weren't witnesses, then there was no betrothal because the witnesses caused the betrothal to be effective, as opposed to witnesses for monetary law, where that's not their role. Their role is not to make the transaction effective. The transaction is a transaction. It happens. It's just we need the witnesses to make sure that nobody later claims this isn't true and this land is mine, etc. So now Abaye comes and says some other statements about Eid Echad. What issues can we believe one witness if, just like in our case, we talked about what if Shnei Hamodim, both the husband and the wife, claim that it was a betrothal, which again, in that issue wasn't effective, but in other areas of halacha, we're going to see that if somebody is silent, in other words, the witness claims one witness claims something against you and you don't react, then we can assume that you're basically admitting to it, and then we actually believe the one witness. So we'll see it comes up in three areas that Abaye says, and then we're going to have to say, why does he say it in all three? Why couldn't we have learned one from the other? So the first case, we're starting on Samachem Abed, about 8 lines from the bottom. Amar Abaye, Amar lo eid echad achalta chelev. If I ate forbidden fats, I have to bring a korban if I did it by accident. I have to bring a korban chatat. So if one witness comes along and says, you ate chelev, v'halas shotek, and I'm just silent, ne'eman, the witness is believed, and I actually have to bring a korban based on that one witness's testimony. V'tana tuna, and here's a tannaitic source to support this. Amar lo eid echad achalta chelev, v'hala omer lo achalti patur. If the witness says I ate chelev and I say I did not, then I'm exempt, because one witness against my word is meaningless. But what can you infer from there? Only because I said no, am I exempt? But tamad amar lo, ha'ishtik, but if I was silent, meheman, then the one witness would be believed. Second case, amar lo Abaye, amar lo edecha nitmeu ta'arotayich. The things that you thought here in your house, the vessels that are pure, they're actually impure. V'halas shotek, and I just don't respond. Ne'eman, again, that witness is then believed. V'tana tuna, and here's a tannaitic source to support. Eid echad omer nitmeu, v'hala omer lo nitmeu, patur. If one witness says they were nitmeu, one witness says they weren't, then patur. Okay, so now it's a little bit trickier. Some people actually change it. It doesn't mean nitmeu. It's something, it means they said about me I was tameh, and that I'm exempt from bringing a korban, because if I went into the temple and I was impure, I'd have to bring a korban. Maybe that's what it's talking about, or maybe it's talking about nitmeu, and then you have to explain what does the word patur mean here. Either which way, it seems to indicate, though, when it comes to purity and impurity, only if I say, no, you're wrong, then it's irrelevant. But, right, then we don't agree with the one witness. We don't obligate me for anything with the one witness said. So again, tamad amar lo, but ha'ishtik, from there you can infer if I was silent, meheman, I'd be believed. Third case, Amar Abaye, Amar lo eid echad shorchan yerba, v'hala shotek. Someone said your shore engaged in bestiality, which means that the shore can no longer be used for a sacrifice. Now, again, it would also mean the shore is supposed to get stoned, but no one's going to say the shore gets stoned based on one witness's testimony. You definitely need two witnesses to do that. So all it would mean here is that you're sure your ox cannot be used for a sacrifice. And I don't say anything. Ne'eman, the witness is believed. V'tanatuna, and here's a brighta to support. V'shene'evda bo avera, v'shehemit al pi ed echad or al pi abalim ne'eman. These are two cases where if the animal was used for an avera, which would mean it was engaged in bestiality, or the shiur killed a person, but the only way we know this is either by ed echad or al pi abalim, either one witness, or the owner himself told us, oh, by the way, my shiur engaged in bestiality, right? Have relations with a human, or my shiur killed a person. Now, again, you're not going to stone, in both these cases, the shiur is supposed to get stoned. We don't stone the ox for this reason, because it's only one witness, or it's only the testimony of the owners. That's not enough to convict, but they're believed in the sense that this ox can no longer be used as a sacrifice. So to disqualify it from being brought as a sacrifice. So again, what's this case of Eid Echad? Again, we want to prove it was Eid Echad and the owners were silent. So now, what are the two possibilities? Either, right, it can't be that the owner denied it. So it would have to be either kamodu ba'alim, hainu al pi ba'alim, halalav d'shatik. If the owner said, yes, you're right, then, well, that's already, there's two cases here. If either of these things happened, it engaged in bestiality or it killed a person, and we knew that either because one witness told us, or we knew it because the Baalim told us. So it can't be that the case of the one witness is, and the owners admitted that this was the case. So you would have to say it was that the owners were silent. It also can't be the owners disagreed, because then you won't accept one witness. So it would have to be the owner was silent. And then again, that proves exactly Abaye is trying to prove. One witness with the silence of the person who's being convicted or whose object is being convicted, that would mean we're going to accept that one witness. Okay, that combination is enough. Okay, it's considered, right? It's not considered fully like two witnesses, but yes, enough to, in case number one, obligate you for a korban. In case number two, to say all the things that, all the impurities you, or the things that you thought were pure are now impure. And in case number three, to forbid your animal from being used as a sacrifice. Utsricha. Why do you need all three cases? If you had the first case, you would have said, if I am obligated to bring a korban and I really didn't do it, let's say you told me I ate chaylev. One witness comes and says I ate chaylev, and I say, right, I just am silent. Now, why would I be silent? If I really didn't eat chaylev, and I know I didn't eat chaylev, then I would have to speak up. Because if I don't speak up, you're going to obligate me to bring a korban. And then what's going to happen? You're going to obligate me to bring a korban that I'm actually not liable to bring. If I'm not obligated to bring a korban and I bring it anyway, that's a korban chatat, that's called chulin ba'azara. That's bringing in something that's not actually a korban and sacrificing it as if it's a korban. We already discussed that very recently, how that's really not allowed at all. It's very serious. So if I really didn't eat the chaylev, so now this is going to be, why is Eid Echad in my silence translated as this definitely happened and we can obligate me in a korban? Because if I didn't do it, I would have spoken up, because I never would have let me bring a sacrifice I didn't need to bring. Then I'm going to end up doing another sin. So basically, we can trust me in this. But if you tell me that my stuff became impure, so I can't eat it when I'm pure, but I could eat it when I'm impure. In other words, if you claim my things that I thought were pure are impure, it's not the biggest deal for me. It's not the biggest loss, because it means that when I'm pure, I can't be in contact with these things. But when I'm impure, I can eat them because I'm impure anyway. So it's not a big loss. Whereas chulin ba'azara would be, I'd have to sin basically. So maybe I just was silent because I didn't care so much. Now let's say once you give case number one and case number two, which again, one is chulin ba'azara, one is my tum'ot. Now you might say my stuff became tameh. Maybe in that case, well, it is still a loss because I can only eat them when I am impure. But when I'm pure, I'm not allowed to, or use them, eat from them, anything. So it's a pain for me, right? And it's like looking at the glass half full or half empty. Before we said, well, part of the time I'm tameh, I can still get to them, so maybe it's not so bad. But now they're focusing on the opposite. Once we say, when I'm silent, we assume that means I did it. Because otherwise, why would I mess myself up for those, days that I'm pure, that I won't be able to use these? Well, what about the last case, though? You might say, but if you came and claimed that my ox engaged in bestiality, and now I can't use it for a sacrifice. Well, Meimer Amar, I could say, I don't need to respond to that because how many of my ox do I really use to bring as sacrifices? Usually I use my ox to work in my fields. I use my ox to slaughter and eat the meat, but I don't generally use my ox to bring sacrifices. But what percentage of my oxen do I use for that? A small percentage. So what's the big deal? I just won't use that one. I'll use the next one. So maybe I was just silent because I didn't really care. And it doesn't necessarily, shouldn't be translated as we normally say, shtika koda'ah. My silence means I'm admitting the truth. I'm admitting that you're right. So sricha, that's why I need to say no. Even though that's the case, we still translate my silence as agreement. Now we get to the sugya that's going to take us all the way till the very bottom of the next, of the end of our daf, till the Mishnah. We have a very big question. They asked the following question. What if somebody says, your wife engaged in sex with another man, and you are now forbidden to her? That's what the witness says, one witness. And you don't respond. Okay, someone, let's say the witness didn't come to you, or whatever they did, they said it in court, whatever it is, they claim that someone engaged in adultery with your wife, and the husband is silent. Okay. Do we view this silence like the other cases, that he's admitting that he believes that it's true? And if he believes it's true, then what happens? Now, if someone commits adultery, there's two major ramifications. One is the woman and the man who committed adultery are supposed to get killed. Obviously, we're not going to kill, just like we weren't going to, right? There's other things. We're not going to kill based on one witness. That's not enough. Okay. Even if there's, the husband is silent, it doesn't mean anything. So now, you definitely are not going to kill them based on one witness's testimony. And in general, we say, we learned this already, you need kol davar shebe'erva, you need two witnesses. So that's going to be for killing. However, perhaps, and this is the question, and Abaye and Rava are going to disagree about this, perhaps the husband, another ramification is that when the wife commits adultery, the wife is not only forbidden to the person she committed adultery with, she's also forbidden to her husband. So if a witness comes along and says to a man, your wife committed adultery, and the man doesn't respond and say, oh, I can't believe that's true, or some sort of response, then do we assume that he's agreeing and he trusts the witness? And for his own sake, now this is again what we say, he's accepting the testimony of the witness. If he accepts the testimony of the witness, that means it goes back to what we said yesterday. It's shavya nafsha chaticha d'isura. He can forbid something to himself. So when he doesn't respond, is that his way of accepting upon himself that his wife is now forbidden to him? And therefore he can't be with his wife anymore. He'd have to give her a get. So that's the big question. Amar Abaye ne'eman. Abaye says one witness, basically, let's just say it in simple terms. One witness with silence of the husband, his reaction is silence, is enough to say the woman is now forbidden to the husband. Okay, or the husband now, his wife is forbidden to him, and therefore he would have to divorce her. Rava Amar, Eino ne'eman. Rava says, what are you talking about? Heavy davar shebe'erva, davar shebe'erva, pachot l'shnayim. We already learned davar, remember? Al pi shnayim edim yakum davar. You need two witnesses to establish anything. And it says davar and erva in the pasuk about the get, right? When you marry a wife, and then kim tzaba ervat davar, because it's in the pasuk about marriage and divorce. We learn that anything that has to do with marriage and divorce needs two witnesses. So basically, we say, comes Ravi, he says, what are you talking about? Even to forbid the wife to the husband, you need two witnesses. One witness is not going to be enough. So now we're going to start with proofs. And Abaye is going to bring two interesting stories. That the second one, much more interesting, a very famous story, that are going to try to prove his point. And we're going to see Rava's reaction. And then we're going to see a proof of Rava and how does Abaye react to Rava's proof. So each one is going to bring proofs for his approach. So again, Abaye says one witness with the silence of the plaintiff is believed. So now, Amar Abaye, minamina. Again, believe not to punish, but believe to, in this case, to forbid the wife to the husband. Where do I get this from? There was a blind man. He would every day come to the Beit Midrash and he would quote Brightot. Okay, he probably had a good memory because he couldn't read, so he remembered things. So, right, we know some people are stronger in certain areas when they're missing one part, so he couldn't see. So he basically spent his life memorizing Brightot and would recite them in the Beit Midrash. One day he came late to the Beit Midrash, and he was late and they didn't see him in the Beit Midrash. Shadar shlicha batre. So Shmuel got worried about him and sent a shaliach, a messenger, to go find out where he is. Ad aza shaliach bechad orcha, hataihu bechad. Well, the shaliach went one way to get to his house, but there was another way to get from his house to the Beit Midrash. And at the same time, the blind man was going to the Beit Midrash the other way. So they missed each other entirely. Okay, why is that relevant? Well, ki ata shaliach, when the shaliach came back to the Beit Midrash after basically going to the blind man's house, coming back to the Beit Midrash, when he got to the house, what did he find in the house? Ki ata shaliach amar ishto zinta. He said, you know what? When I got to your house, I saw that your wife was with another man. So the blind man goes to before Rav Shmuel and says, you know, what's the story? Am I forbidden to my wife based on this? Amarle, if you trust this witness, this messenger, zil apka, you should divorce your wife. Ilo, and if you don't trust him, lo tapik, then don't divorce your wife. So now, what does it mean if you trust him? My love comes Abaye and he says, what he means is, there's all these rules we'll get to in Sanhedrin about who can and can't be a witness. Okay, who is one of the main people who can't be a witness is someone who steals, because the assumption is they will take money. They'll get paid money by people to lie in court. Since they steal money, right, and take people's money for no reason, they might likely take your money to, take someone else's money to lie in court. So therefore, what he's saying is, if he's a kosher witness, meaning he's not a thief or something else which would disqualify him from being a witness, then you have to divorce your wife. Now, what do you see here? One witness, the husband was silent because he didn't really know, right? So he didn't really respond and say, no way did my wife do that kind of thing. I know my wife. So what we're saying is, basically one witness is believed here in order to make him divorce his wife, to be forbidden to stay with her. So Rava, how's he going to explain this story? What he meant is, if you trust him, meant like this. If you decide that this witness is so believable that you believe him as if he's like two witnesses, in other words, one witness wouldn't be enough. You would have to say, this witness is so trustworthy. For me, he's like two witnesses. Now, remember who this witness was also. He was the messenger of the Beit Midrash, of Shmuel's Beit Midrash. It must be someone who is trustworthy. So if you think, now this goes back to Shavi and Nafsha Chaticha Yisura. If you decide you want to believe this witness because you think he's a very trustworthy guy, and then you basically say, well, then I'm going to forbid myself to my wife, then you have to divorce her. If you don't believe him that much, then don't. But this has nothing to do with one witness being believed in general. This is something different. This is just, do you yourself want to forbid your wife to yourself, but not that the law says you have to. And in this case, it would mean also like the court can't enforce him to divorce her. The rabbi is just saying, if you really think he's right, then you shouldn't really be with your wife anymore, because likely she committed adultery. But more like it's a self-imposed. You'll impose it on yourself if that's what you think, but not that the law says you have to do that. And that's why Rava says this doesn't prove anything. Now we're going to get to a very famous story, which is Abaye's second proof. Okay, it'll take a while till we get to the proof. In the meantime, we'll learn a very interesting story. Amar Abaye menamina. Where do I get it from? Another proof. Did time. Says in a bright. Maseh Yannai hamelech. You might remember King Yannai. He's also called Alexander Yannai because he was, I think, living or maybe conquered Alexandria. Anyway, Yannai the king. Okay, he's very famous for this story. Okay, where in the end of this story, I'll kind of take away the end, but in the end of the story, he's going to kill all of the rabbis, all except for one who gets hidden. Doesn't say so in this story, but it comes up in other stories, that his sister, Yannai HaMelech's sister, Shlom Tzion HaMalka, was married to, Shlom Tzion, not the Malka probably, but Shlom Tzion, I think it was Shlom Tzion, his sister, if I'm not getting the names wrong. Shlom Tzion was married to, maybe Shlom Tzion was his wife. Anyway, his sister was married to Shimon ben Shatach. Oh, Shimon ben Shatach's sister was Shlom Tzion. Oh no, did I get confused now? Okay, no, I'm confused. I don't remember the details. Okay, so Achi Ishto Haya. That's what it was. Yeah. I just got it wrong. Shlom Tzion, the queen, was Shimon ben Shatach's sister. That's what I got wrong. And she was married to Yannai. That makes sense. Okay, I knew she was Shlom Tzion, the queen, but she was married to Yannai, and she basically saved Shimon ben Shatach. She hid him because she knew what her brother was up to, so she hides him. So now we're going to see the whole story. It's a very political story, and we're going to see what happens here. So he goes to this place in the desert called Kochalit. He captures 60 cities, He was very happy. He calls all the chachamim, all the rabbis. Why he says this and why he does this, I'm not really sure of the meaning of the story. There's a lot of things in the story that are going to raise questions. I'm going to raise most of them and kind of leave it for you to think about some conclusions you could come to about this. He somehow wants to go back to the building of the Beit HaMikdash, and he says basically that our fathers ate salty foods, meaning they ate poor man's food when they were building the temple, the second temple. So when we're going to have this big celebration, but we're going to eat poor man's food to remember the rabbis who built the second temple. And now this kind of ironic thing, they take poor man's food and they put it al shulchanot shel zahav. They put it on these tables of gold, like it's a very weird image, eating poor man's food on tables of rich people. And then they sat and ate. There was a very bad person there, very evil person. Elazar ben Po'ira shmo, and his name was Elazar ben Po'ira. Vayomer Elazar ben Po'ira liYannai HaMelech. Elazar ben Po'ira says to Yannai HaMelech. Now you might notice something strange, and this is going to come up in a whole bunch of places. Even the word Bilyal is a Tanakh word. Also, Vayomer is a Tanakh phrase. We never see this in the Gemara. Vayomer, and he said. This is something you see all over in the Tanakh. You do not generally see this in tannaitic stories, so it's very strange why they use the lashon of Tanakh. You're going to also see, I'll already tell you to pay attention, there's similarities to this story to two Tanakh stories. One is the Purim story, Achashverosh and Haman. We're going to see Elazar ben Po'ira is the Haman figure, and Yannai HaMelech is the Achashverosh figure. Obviously, he's the king. We're going to see comparisons to the Korach story, where Korach said, right, who made you, Moshe, the leader? We're going to see an exact quote from there. If you remember, he says, Rav lach b'nei Levi. So we're going to see Rav lach, he's going to say to them. So it seems to be comparing, and I want you to think already about what's, the message of the Purim story, what's the message of the Korach story, and here it's some sort of combination of the two. So now let's keep reading. So Elazar ben Po'ir says to Yannai HaMelech, Libam shel prushim alecha. You invited all these rabbis to your feast, right? But don't you know they're against you, these rabbis. The rabbis are always called the prushim, right? They're the people who keep the oral tradition going. And it's against the tzdukim who really believe in the strict, right, Torah shebichtav, the written Torah. So he says, these rabbis are all against you. They don't believe in you. They're your political enemies. Umay says, he says to him, so what should I do? So again, this is classic Achashverosh, right? Okay, what do you recommend, right? He's not the kind of guy who has his own ideas. So what do you recommend? Hakem lahem batzitz shebenecha. Put the tzitz on you. That was something the Kohen Gadol wore. It says to Yannai, right? Show them you're the Kohen Gadol. Make them, hakem means make them stand up, because the tzitz has the name of God in it. So whenever the Kohen Gadol would wear it, everybody would stand up. Make them stand up. But also to stand up means to react, to stand up against someone, right? So he's basically saying, let's see what they're made of. Let's see what's going to happen. When they see you put on the tzitz, if they think you shouldn't be the Kohen Gadol because they're against you, they're going to start up with you. Hayasham zaken echad, v'Yehuda ben Gedid yishmo. Okay, notice there was echad ish leitz, and now there's zaken echad. This is very interesting. This is showing that an entire war, so to speak, okay, can be fought because of two people. Okay, in other words, it wasn't Yannai HaMelech and his people. It wasn't the rabbis and their people. The rabbis are very silent in this whole story. It's one bad guy and one good guy that are going to cause this horrible thing to happen. Vayomer Yehuda ben Gedidya liYannai HaMelech. He gets up and he says to Yannai HaMelech, Rav lach keter malchut, is it not enough for you that you have the crown and you're the king? Remember, he was I didn't say this, but Yannai HaMelech was a Cheshmonai king. The Cheshmonaim were from, right, this is from the Hanukkah story, right? The Cheshmonaim were both kings and they were kohanim. He said, is it not enough for you to have the crown of the malchut? Hanach keter kahuna l'zarosh shel Aharon. Leave the keter kahuna for the people of Aaron, meaning stay out of the kahuna. Now, he was a Cheshmonai. He was born a kohen. So what's the problem? Shayu amrim, and comes this Yehuda ben Gedidya, and he says to him, Imo nishbeit b'modi'in. People said that your mother was taken into captivity in Modi'in. This is Modi'in of today, most people think. And if she was taken into captivity, she couldn't be married to your father, because remember, this goes back to our Mishnah also, where they talked about if, right, she was taken into captivity. So when she gets back, we assume she was raped, and then she can't be married to the father. And that would make you, Yannai HaMelech, the son of this forbidden marriage, disqualified from being a kohen. Vayivukash hadavar v'lo nimtza. This is taken from the Megillah, right? Vayivukash hadavar. So, right, they check into it, and it turns out they see it's not true. Okay, it's not true that Yannai HaMelech his mother was taken into captivity. We're going to get back to this. This is going to be our whole thing that we're going to, why are we here? If you remember, because we're now in the middle of the story. Abaye uses this as his proof for one witness, and the husband not saying anything is proof that it was true. So we're going to get back to it. He separates himself from the rabbis very angrily. Okay, after they accuse him of this, and they were false in their accusation, he decides to separate himself from all the rabbis in a huge thing of anger. Vayomer Elazar ben Po'ira Yannai HaMelech, again this Vayomer, and right, Vivukasha Davar is also Tanachi. Yannai HaMelech, Hediot Sheb'Yisrael Kachu Dino. I understand a regular guy, they might do this to him and, accuse him of something. But Atam Melech v'Kohen Gadol Kachu Dincha, what? You're going to let these people do this to you? You're the king and you're the high priest. You're basically at the top of everything in our religion. What? You're going to let them treat you like this? Again, the simple Yannai HaMelech. So what am I supposed to do? So says to him, Elazar ben Po'ira, if you want to listen to me, kill them all. V'Torah matei aleha. So Yannai says, well, what's going to be with the Torah if I kill all the rabbis? You can see he doesn't really want to do this. He says, what's the difference? You don't need the rabbis. You just need the Torah. The Torah will be put in a corner. Anyone who wants it can come get it. It'll be accessible to whoever wants. Okay, they'll have the Torah. Now, what are they missing? The oral tradition, right? That's in the rabbis' hand. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Miyan is rekabu apikoros. From the fact that Yannai HaMelech agrees to this idea and doesn't say the following, must be that he became an apikoros at that moment. He basically rejects the whole, he accepts Elazar ben Po'ira's suggestion. He should have said, Tinach Torah shebechtav, Torah shebal peh mai. He should have said, yeah, well, that's only going to leave us the written Torah, but what about the oral Torah? Okay, and basically he doesn't say that. That basically means he rejects the oral Torah tradition. Miyad vatutats, again, more tannaitic, a Torah type. At least the word may not be from the Torah, but the way it's written again is like Vayomer vatutats hara'a al yidei Elazar ben Po'ira, which means basically the evil was ignited by Elazar ben Po'ira. Vayehargu kol chachmei Yisrael va'ayah ha'olam mishtomem. They killed all the chachamim and the land was silent. Ad sheba Shimon ben Shatach v'echzir haTorah liyoshna. Until one man came, Shimon ben Shatach, who, as I told you before, was saved by his sister, who was married to Yannai, and basically she saved him. And because of that, Torah Sheba'al Peh existed based on this one man, okay, Shimon ben Shatach, and he returns the Torah to what it was. Okay, so we have this tragic story of Yannai HaMelech killing all the rabbis. The rabbis are silent. They don't respond. They don't do anything. They were silent in the beginning. They don't argue against him. They also don't, they don't fight back. It's this very tragic story. And really, it's caused by two individuals. Okay, those two individuals sounds like the Bar Kamsa story, right? It's very similar, where it's basically these individuals that caused this terrible tragedy that befall the Jewish people. Now, what this is doing here and why they're stressing the importance of Torah Sheba'al Peh, specifically in this section, I don't have an answer to it. I think we need to think about it. But definitely we're having a very strong stress on the importance of Torah Sheba'al Peh here. And again, it's like a Stuki Prushi battle going on. And that's our story. So let's see what Abaye does. What's the case? In other words, when they accused him based on what kind of testimony? And in the end, when they check and they find out it's not true, on what testimony did they find out it wasn't true? If it's that they had two witnesses that said she was taken into captivity, and then they have two witnesses that say she wasn't taken into captivity when they looked into it, well, why should we say, oh, it's clear you're a fine kohen because there's a doubt. We have 2 against 2. We don't know who to believe. And then we should basically say, stop being a kohen because maybe you're really not. Maybe you're invalid. It must be one witness, and then it's going to prove our point. Why? Well, Tama, one witness came and said she was taken into captivity. Then they look into it, and what do they find? That it wasn't true, because 2 witnesses say she wasn't. So 2 witnesses override 1. So what do you learn from this? So if it was it's only because 2 witnesses went out against them, but him. But if not, though, mehiman. But if you didn't have the 2 witnesses, then they would have been believed. It was only because vayivukasha davar and they found 2 witnesses to go against, then they knocked out the 1 witness. But if the 1 witness was there by himself and nobody contradicted, then he would have been believed, and that's Abaye's proof. What's Rava going to say? Rava's going to say that wasn't the situation. Rava amar lo'olam trei u'trei. It was really 2 against 2. Uchida amar Rav Acha bar Rav min Yume be'edei hazama, just like Rav Acha bar Rav min Yume said in a different place, it wasn't 2 against 2. These 2 said she was taken into captivity. These 2 said she wasn't. We had 2 who said she was taken into captivity on this and this day, this and this time. 2 witnesses came, hachanami, we're going to say the same thing here, be'edei hazama. That it was 2 witnesses came and said, there's no way you could say she was taken into captivity on that day at that time because we were somewhere else with you at that day, and we're going to learn in Masechet Makot. That's the way you can knock out witnesses, and then the first group of witnesses would knock out entirely. It's not what we call a de'ach chasha, contradictory testimony. It's that they say, on this and this day she was taken into captivity, and those guys say on this and this day, she wasn't taken into captivity. But it's that those say there's no way you could have testified that way, and the Torah actually believes them, the second group, and that's what happened here. It has nothing to do with 1 witness. That's one way of Rava's response. Alternatively, Rava can respond, There's a lot of debate about what exactly this means. Literally, it means they put a shifcha in her place. So some people explain what this means is 2 witnesses said she was taken into captivity, and then 2 witnesses said, we saw her taken into captivity, but immediately she was replaced by a maidservant, which means that she was not there long enough to have been raped. And therefore, it's not that you're right, she was taken into captivity, but we also know that she was also released immediately, and therefore nothing happened, and therefore she was permitted to go back to her husband. So that's one way of saying it. Some people say she was with the shifcha the whole time, and the shifcha testified that we had this whole thing in Ketubot, right? Can you accept testimony of people that said nothing really transpired there, she wasn't raped? So anyway, bit of a debate about that. Again, hard to talk so much today about captives and rape and all those kind of things going on in captivity. Okay, moving now to Abaye. Now Rava comes with his proof. So Abaye brought 2 proofs, and we have responses of Rava to the potential proofs of Abaye. Mina min Allah. Rava says, where do I get this from? Ditna, which usually means we find it in a Mishnah. In this case, it's actually a Tosefta, not a Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Shimon. Maaseh b'megura shel diskim b'Yavne. There was a mikvah of diskim, which either is a person or is a mikvah of a place called diskim that was in Yavne. Shaita umedet b'chezkat shlema. Umadadu v'nimtzeit chasera. Well, at 9 o'clock, I'm just giving an example. At 9 o'clock in the morning, they checked, it had 40 se'ah, which is the minimum measurement required for a mikvah. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they measured, and they realized it didn't have 40 se'ah anymore. It was missing. Now, once it has less than 40 se'ah, it's not effective. Any person who goes in the mikvah, any utensils that go in the mikvah are not purified. Well, what happened between everything between 9 and 4? We know at 9 it was fine. We know at 4 it wasn't fine. What happens to everything that was toveled in that mikvah between 9 and 4? Kol ta'arat shenasu al gaba, haya Rabbi Tarfon mitaher v'Rabbi Kiva mitameh. We have a machlok of Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Tarfon says it's totally fine. Rabbi Kiva says it's not fine at all. Retroactively, we have to basically say anything that was done in this mikvah after 9 o'clock is a problem. I'm a Rabbi Tarfon. So now we're going to have an argument between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Kiva. In the end, Rabbi Tarfon is going to concede to Rabbi Kiva and say, you're right. Amar Rabbi Tarfon, mikveh zeh b'chezkat shalem hu amed. Well, what do? We go by chazaka. What was the status quo of the mikveh at 9 o'clock, right? The status was, it was tahor. Until we know it wasn't, it remains in its status quo. So we assume it was tameh until such time that we find out it was, we assume it was good until such time that we find out it wasn't. In other words, things remain in their status quo. Whatever it was, it remains until we know otherwise. So therefore, this mikveh was with 40 se'ah. Until we know it wasn't, we can assume it was. And therefore, don't say that out of a doubt, we have to assume it was missing, already after, let's say, from 10. I'm a Rabbi Akiva. You want to talk to me about chazaka? I'll talk to you about chazaka, but we have 2 issues here. One is, was the mikveh whole, did it have everything it needed, or it was supposed to have, or not? Number 2, we have our real safek, though, isn't about the mikveh. Our safek is about the people or the vessels that were toveled in that mikveh. Now, those people what's their chazaka before they went in the mikvah? Adam zeh, this person who went in the mikvah at 10 o'clock in the morning, b'chazkat tamei. He was status, until we know, right, was impure. So now, who b'chazkat tamei who made? Misafek atabala taro. Out of a doubt, you're going to say, oh, well, we're not sure if this mikvah was good or not, but we're going to say that got you out of your status quo, and now you're going to be pure? No way. You can't remove his status of being impure out of a doubt. Right? We're not sure if he really toveled or not. So it's very interesting because there's two perspectives here. It's the status quo of the mikvah, the status quo of the person. So they have this machlok, and it would be the same about the vessel. I'm a Rabbi Tarfon. So Rabbi Tarfon tries a different argument. Here's going to be our issue that's going to have to do with testimony. We have a guy who's working in the Beit HaMikdash, he's a kohen, and all of a sudden, while he's finishes a korban, sprinkles the blood on the altar, someone comes and says, hey, I have testimony that your mother was a divorcee when she married your father, and you're a halal and you can't work in the temple. Well, avadatok shera. Now, from that moment on, he's kicked out of the temple, but what he did before is actually okay. So now we're going to say same thing, right? B'diavad, it was done already. We're going to assume it's fine. That's what Rabbi Tarfon says about the mikvah. Hamar Rabbi Akiva, what are you talking about? I'll give you a different comparison. It's like someone who, while he's doing the worshiping in the temple, he's doing the sacrifice, and he finishes sprinkling the blood, and somebody comes and says, you're blemished. We then go back and we disqualify any korban he did. Like if he did a korban for you, you'd have to bring another korban. It doesn't work. So why are you comparing it to the Ben Grusha? Why don't you compare it to the Baal Mum? So Amar Rabbi Tarfon, now, by the way, we don't know yet why the chalutza, retroactively it's okay, and the Baal Mum is the blemished person, it's not okay. That's going to be the last thing the Gemara is going to do before we get to the next Mishnah. But in the middle, right now, they're in the middle of the arguing between them. So let's just accept it as fact now, but we'll see where they get it from later. So he says, you compared it to the Baal Mum. I compared it to the Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza. Why don't we see to who it's more similar? Right? Is this mikvah more like a Ben Grusha or Ben Chalutza? And then nidunenu ke Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza. Then we'll say retroactively it was okay. Im domeh leBaal Mum, nidunenu ke Baal Mum. So all Rabbi Tarfon does is he suggests this is the way we have to figure out who's right, you or me. Let's figure out to who is more similar. To which it's Rabbi Akiva ladun. So Rabbi Akiva says, I'll prove it to you, which is more similar. Mikveh psulo b'yachid, uBaal Mum psulo b'yachid. One witness can testify for the mikveh being disqualified, and one witness can testify for this blemished person. But al yochiach ben grusha ben chalutza shepsulo b'shnayim. But to disqualify a ben grusha to say you're a halal, you need two witnesses. Okay, why? Because it's davar shebe'erva, right? That's what we said. Davar achel, a different explanation. The Rabbi Akiva says, mikveh psulo b'gufo, Baal Mum psulo b'gufo. Both of them, the mikveh, it's a psul in the mikveh itself. The Baal Mum, the blemished person, it's a psul on the person himself. But the Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza is not on his own body. He didn't do anything wrong. The disqualification is from his mother and his father, who did this, in this forbidden marriage. To which, so therefore, basically, he says we should retroactively disqualify because it's more similar to the Baal Mum. Rabbi Tarfon, Akiva, kol poresh mincha keporesh min achim. Anyone who separates themselves from you is like separating from life. Okay, meaning, I agree with you, you're right, you're very smart, you know everything, and I'm going to go with what you say. This, by the way, is, I think, a reference to the previous story, where it said, Vayibadel is to separate. It's the same thing as like lifrosh. And if you remember, Yannai HaMelech separated himself from the rabbis. And here again, it's another story saying, don't separate yourself from the rabbis. Like, you have the right tradition. You've got the Torah Shebaal Peh. You understand how to translate things, how to explain things. And you obviously, have what it takes. Anyway, I think it's a similar story here about the value of the rabbis and their ability to understand the Torah properly. Anyway, now they want to prove Rava from here. Hi, Baal Mum, shepsulo b'yachid hechidam. When it says we accept one witness, what are we talking about? If it's one witness who says it's a Baal Mum and the person himself says, I am not blemished, well, mimahema, we're not going to believe one witness against this person. So Ella, it must be dishatik, and this will prove Rava. Someone comes into the temple, one witness, because we said psulo b'yachid according to the Braita, right? Meaning one witness is accepted, and the kohen himself just said nothing. Then we're going to believe him. And according to this, if you're going to say that's the case, which would then prove Abaye, and this is Rava. If you're going to say the case was one witness came and he was just silent, well, you have to match it up to the Ben Grusha case. And then with the Ben Grusha, Ben Chalutza, it would be the same thing. Two witnesses came and he was silent. Vikatane, and what does it say? Mikveh psulo b'yachiv, ba'almum psulo b'yachiv, va'al yochiach ben grusha ben chalutza, shepsulo b'shnayim. So now this says, two witnesses come, he's silent, and what do we say? It doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Right? Sorry, I said something a little not right before that proves Abaye. It doesn't prove Abaye, the Balmum, because the Balmum has nothing to do with our case. We're trying to say in the case of Znut, now this is like Znut, it's a little different, but it's an improper relationship. Basically, if two witnesses come and say, you're a Ben Grusha Ben Chalutzan, he's silent, right? Then you'll believe the witnesses. But what does that mean? It's not psulo b'yachid, meaning if one witness came and he was silent, then we wouldn't believe the one witness, because that's the whole point of what he claims in the Braita. The Ben Grusha Ben Chalutzan need two. And again, if you're going to compare it, it would have to be two against his silence or versus one against his silence, meaning one with the Baldim being silent wouldn't work. If I'm a kohen working in the temple and someone comes and says, one person, I'm a Ben Grusha Ben Chalutzah and I'm silent, doesn't disqualify me because you need two for Erev. That proves Rava. Okay. And that's how he understands this source. What's Abaye going to say? No, it's not a case where one comes and I was silent. One comes and I argue against him, or two come and I argue against him. And then, right, you would have to compare now. Now, what was the whole thing? Why did we assume it was one and he was silent? Because the moon would have to be one and he was silent. If one came and I argued and I said, I'm not blemished, we wouldn't accept one witness. Comes Abaye and he says, we would accept one witness if I wasn't silent. Why? Even if I say I am not blemished, why is the moon case different from the Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza? Well, if they claim I'm blemished and I say I am not blemished, they'll say to me, take off your clothes and let's see. We know you have a blemish. Someone said, you have a blemish there, let's check it. Same thing with the mikvah. Someone comes and says the mikvah is not complete. Even if I say the mikvah is complete, doesn't make a difference. We're going to go check. We can measure exactly how much is in the mikvah. This is something that can be clearly identified. Yes, it is, or yes, no, it's not, because it's in front of our faces. As opposed to whether the mother's status was a chalutzar grusha when she married the father, that's already up to, accepting testimony. We can't just reveal that. It's not seen to the naked eye. So therefore, that's the difference. And then you can say this wasn't a case where the Baldim was silent. Even if the Baldim went against it, right? One witness would still be accepted because they could say, let's see, are you a Balmum? Are you this? Whereas in the Grusha Ben Chalutza case, that wouldn't work. But that's because, again, as soon as Abaye says this isn't comparable to our case. Because you come into say, I'm a Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza, one witness, and I say, I am not. Well, then we're not going to accept your testimony because we can't just check it out. So then it's not this case at all. We need a case where it's one against my silence. So now, V'hainu dekatane, and he proves it because it says, that's what he says in the second claim, Rabbi Akiva. Mikvah psulo b'gufo, u'ba'almum psulo b'gufo, ba'al yochi ben grusha ben chalutza, shepsulo me'achirim. Right? And that's exactly the second difference, that it comes from someone else. It's not in its body, meaning you can't check it. Now we have to get to the proofs, how we know ben grusha ben chalutza davodatok shera minalan. How do we know that retroactively? Okay, so again, what we had so far in this sugya was very simple. Can you accept one witness's testimony if the husband's silent to forbid him to his wife? Abaye says yes. Rava says no, you need two. And then Abaye brought two proofs, the two stories, the blind person and Yannai, and explained that it was one witness and the Baal was silent. In the end, they reject, right? Rava gives his own reason why it's different. Then Rava brought a proof, and then Abaye explained how he reads that source. Now we just have to explain this last part about ben grusha ben chalutza davodatok shera minalan. And how do we know that retroactively, when you come into the Beit HaMikdash and he's already done work, and now you find out he's ben grusha, we don't retroactively cancel what he did. So three proofs. Amar Rav Yudah Amar Shmuel, Amar Kra, by Pinchas it says, Vaytal lo ulizaro acharab. The kohen is for you and for your children after you. Here they say it includes all your zera, ben zera kasher, ben zera pasul, even if they were disqualified. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean once they're disqualified, they can't work in the kahuna. But if they were disqualified now, and it means they were disqualified before, but we didn't know it then, we're going to let it go and let it be kosher. Shmuel's father said, the bracha and V'zot bracha 4 that we just read on Simchat Torah for Levi, What is chelo? It's a reference to afilu chulin shebo tirtzeh. Pol yadav tirtzeh means God will accept their handiwork, right? Which means their work in the temple. So chelo means even if it's chulin, even if it was done incorrectly. Rabbi Yannai amar mehacha ubata el kohen asher yeh bayamim hahem. It's very famous. It says for bikurim you bring it to the kohen in that day. Now, kitalel da'atcha adam olechet kohen shelo haya bayamav. What other kohen are you going to go to if not the kohen who's in your day? Well, it's a ridiculous phrase. You're going to go to the kohen who lived 100 years ago. He's not in existence. So ela zeh kasher v'nitchalel. What it means is, even if the kohen that was in your day ends up being disqualified, as long as you gave it to him before he was disqualified, it's okay. Now we need to learn balmum davadoto psula minal. And how do we know a balmum that his work is disqualified retroactively if it turns out you were blemished? Damar Rav Yehuda, Damar Shmuel, Damar Kra. Just one pasuk for this. Lachen emor hineni noten lo et briti shalom. This is also by Pinchas. What is shalom? It's a reference to kashu shalem, lo kashu chaser, when he's complete, and not when he's missing something. V'ha shalom tiv, but it says shalom, not shalem. How can you read it as shalom? Shalem. Amar Rav Nachman, vav de shalom ketiyahi. This is very famous. The vav is either cut in the middle. There's like a little empty space between two parts of the vav, or some people say it's a small vav. Okay, and then it's a reference to the fact that you should read it also without the vav, and that it's a reference to being complete. Okay, last thing for today, we're now going to give 4 cases of different cases where the status of children either follows the mother or the father, or perhaps one or the other, and we're going to see. We normally know, and that's the first line of this Mishnah, there's a normal Kiddushin, there's no sin, regular person marries a regular person. The child's going to follow the father, meaning if the father's a kohen, the child's a kohen. Father's a Yisrael, the child's a Yisrael. It doesn't matter what the status of the mother is. Ezo, what is this? Zo kohenet leviav Yisraeli, chenisah lekohen leviav Yisrael. Okay, regular relationship. This whole thing is going to lead us to the next chapter, which is Asara Yuchsim, where we're going to talk about all different who can marry who and who can't marry who. If you have Kiddushin, but there's a sin, meaning Kiddushin or Tovsim, if you remember, we've talked about this a lot of times, the Kiddushin will be valid, but it's not allowed. So for example, right, and then the Vlad follows the worst case scenario, meaning whoever's damaged, okay, whether it's the father or the mother. Ezo, any forbidden kohen marriage, the child's going to be a halal, meaning it goes by the problem. Whether a woman marries a mamzer or a male marries a mamzer, or mamzeret, so the child's going to be a mamzeret or a mamzer, male or female. V'chomi, category 3, she'ein la'alav kiddushin, aval yesh la'al achirim kiddushin, havlav mamzer. A father can't marry a daughter, and if he does, there's no valid kiddushin. Now, that's a case where they can't marry each other, but they can marry other people. The father can marry some other woman, and the daughter can marry some other man. It's just them to each other can't work. That's all arayot, because it's all relationships. Then the vlad is going to be a mamzer also. Kol mi she'ein lo alav v'lo al achirim kiddushin havlad k'mota. And this is a very important halacha. If a non-Jewish woman marries a Jewish man, or a shivcha knani marries a Jewish man, the child goes after the mother. That means the child is considered non-Jewish, not a mamzer. So what's the relevance? Well, if that child converts, they can actually marry not a kohen, but anybody else, because a kohen can marry gioret, but they can marry anybody else because the child will not be, it's not a mamzer, that child. Okay, so that's a really important halacha that's very relevant. Okay, so that's the 4 categories. We'll go back to this tomorrow when we see the Gemara on this section. Wishing everybody a good day and hopefully for good news. Okay, bye.